So welcome everyone to DIME's September webinar. Every month I have to read the date because I cannot keep track of my months. And we have a very exciting session today here where we're talking about bettering patient engagement and activation using digital pill technology. We have a fantastic panel of speakers today. But before we jump into our presentation, let's go ahead and let me do some quick housekeeping. So please note that today's session is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be freely available on our website today after today's live session. And of course, the magic of our live events too is the live function for the Q&A part here. This is my favorite part. It's a bit of a Wild West where you get to ask all of your burning questions to all of our fantastic panelists. So don't be shy. The way this works too is you're welcome to drop questions in the Q&A panel to us in the chat function. And I can also unmute you to ask your questions live. I think that's where the fun stuff is. So be sure to bring your questions. The hard ones, the fun ones, the better. And we'll go ahead and jump into what you all came here today for. So we have a great selection of folks to talk with us today about this really important technology. I think a lot of people are interested to learn more about, if not already have a lot of really strong opinions about. So really excited to learn more from this great variety of folks speaking with us today. And so we're privileged to have a fantastic round of speakers today. So we'll start with Susan Baumgartner, the former VP of Clinical Regulatory Affairs at ETechRx. And then we'll also follow up with a presentation from Kelly Brassel, the Director of Research and Real World Evidence at PAC Health, who will also present alongside Allison Rosen, who we are thrilled to have as an expert patient here. We'll also include Dr. Edward Greeno, the Professor of Medicine and Chief of Cancer Care at the University of Minnesota M Health at Fairview, to give us a clinician's perspective on using this kind of technology. We'll also include fantastic insight from Mark Sapp, Director of Digital Platforms at Janssen Pharmaceuticals. And then afterwards, too, we'll bring in Eric Buffkin, President and CEO of ETechRx, to help us with the super fun Q&A session that I'm also looking forward to. Okay, enough of me. Let's go ahead and jump into the presentations here. Susan, why don't you kick us off?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Rachel, and thanks to the Digital Medicine Society for the platform to be able to share some perspectives with all of you. I'm Susan Baumgartner, and I'm happy to be presenting on behalf of ETechRx. And we'll share with you today an update on our digital pill system, the IDCAP system, and talk a little bit about its application for medication adherence and patient engagement. Next slide. So, ETechRx is a digital health company. We have an FDA-cleared IDCAP system that is a platform-level technology for medication adherence measurement and improvement of medication adherence. And we offer a suite of services that support the measurement and improvement in adherence. It's an accurate, flexible, very reliable digital pill system. And next slide, I will tell you a little bit about the components of the FDA cleared system. This slide shows the 4 components of the system, and we start with an ID capsule. That is a pharmaceutical grade capsule shell that has an ingestible sensor in the body of it. And that capsule can deliver any medication to be tracked using this system. It's orally delivered. Once the patient ingests that ID capsule containing the medication, the ingested sensor creates a low power radio frequency signal that's sent out, essentially reporting that it's been taken. And when it hits the patient's GI fluid, that signal starts to send, and the signal is actually picked up in the second panel you see there, the wearable reader that the patient is wearing. And the signal is picked up on that reader. It's logged in that reader, and it's communicated to the patient app and to the cloud for use. And so in the reader panel there, you can see a lanyard-based reader that's worn around the neck of the patient, which is what was FDA cleared. We've evolved that reader from a patch system early on in its development, and we're moving very quickly to a wrist-worn reader for convenience to the patient and to enable a seamless use of the technology in the patient's life. The information is passed from that wearable reader to a patient-facing app. So the patient is seeing the same information that's collected. They're expecting the information to be flowing. They're sharing that information freely, and they opt in to share that freely with the clinician or the researcher. And information flows from the phone to the cloud and then to a clinician dashboard for viewing by clinicians and researchers. Next slide, please. So this system is tried and tested. It's been validated, it's been cleared by the FDA, and it's a platform system that's now available for use. And we are seeking collaborators and looking for applications for use of the technology to be able to provide a rigorous and measurable documentation of medication adherence at the level of each dose and passed along in real time and available to those who need it. The IDCAP system has been used in to log over 6,000 ingestions. Hundreds of patients have used it. Data continues to flow in from our studies and our clinical use cases on a daily basis. And we're excited to share the technology that has been fully validated. We've completed pivotal studies, we've done usability studies, and the accuracy of the system in documenting the ingestion of medications dose by dose and supporting the patient in their journey and using the medication that's been prescribed for them, and also the documentation of this information in studies has been proven in the work that we've done with academic medical centers and researchers and clinicians. Next slide. The topic that we're here to talk about today is patient engagement and activation. And I think one of the questions we get most of the time is, are patients willing to ingest a sensor? Are they willing to use the technology that you've presented to them? And we've done a lot of work at ETechRx to make sure that we've created a digital pill system that is acceptable, that patients are willing to use, and that they can engage with over time. And we've done that in a very patient-focused way so that it's easy for them to use the system. They're able to consistently use it with chronic therapy where there's a significant need for medication tracking. And we've engaged them in the process so that they're almost looking to get credit for those doses that they're taking. They've put medication taking front and center. They have a system for being able to track and report that information to their healthcare provider or their researcher in the research in which they're engaged. And it allows them to be a part of the process rather than being tracked by another group on the back end. Next slide. So we took a look, we thought the COVID-19 pandemic and use of our system during the pandemic gave us a good glimpse of whether or not we could engage patients with the system in a very distracted environment and an environment in which a study that was ongoing was disrupted and also was changed in terms of the study visits that patients were allowed to see. To participate in. And so we took a look at data on a study that was ongoing from July 2020 to February of this year and evaluated whether or not those patients that were enrolled and continued in that study with some redesigned study design, if they were able to engage with our system, and found that 98% of monitored days, patients engaged with the system. They were taking the ingestible sensor encapsulated medication. They were using the reader successfully. They were recording those events. And those numbers are extraordinary during a time when there were a lot of other things going on in lives and a lot of changes to the study. It was only about 2.6% where the patient was reporting that information via the app only. But the vast majority, 95.4% of the time, they were using that system, and there was no decline in that engagement over time. Next slide. The most exciting part of our technology is being able to put it in the hands of folks like all of you who are using it to intervene with the patient, to engage the patient about their therapy, about their outcomes, about how to get the most success in their treatment. And that's given us the most information in terms of being able to use our technology to generate data that can be used to either digitally or personally allow a clinician or a researcher to reinforce good behavior, to encourage or correct behavior when doses are missed, and to be able to provide reminders when they're needed, engagement with the patient around real and meaningful data and objective data that we can use to learn about the context, and that clinicians and care providers can use to learn about the context of how patients are taking or not taking their medications as directed and as they've committed to. So the platform of data allows you to be able to intervene and to be able to affect outcomes in a way that you haven't been able to before, with a digital clinical measure of objective medication adherence that is accurate and reliable and patient-focused. And so I wanted to end with the fact that we have validated the technology. It's a platform that's available. We're excited to put it in your hands and see all the good that all of you can do with it. Thank you, and I will pass this back to Rachel.
Fantastic. Thank you, Susan. So now we are going to move on to get some really interesting insight from both Kelly and from Allison. And I'm really looking forward to this presentation also because it's very privileged to be able to speak with a patient directly about anything at all, especially in digital medicine, especially for technology like this. So I'm very much looking forward to all the presentations today. And I will have to say a little bit weighted towards this one right now. So happy for Kelly and Allison to kick us off.
Well, thank you so much for having us today. My name is Kelly Brassel. I'm the Director of Research and Real World Evidence at PAC Health, and honored to present with Allison Rosen, who's an absolutely outstanding patient advocate in the colorectal and larger cancer survivorship space. Next slide. We included our disclosures. You can tell we present at a lot of academic conferences. Next slide. So for my part of the presentation today, I'll be focusing on oral adherence insights collected in the context of our digital health coaching platform at PAC Health. And the focus here is really to expound upon insights from individuals themselves with cancer diagnosis in terms of how they're experiencing oral adherence, and particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So we know from the literature there are many barriers and opportunities in the context of oral adherence, and those barriers can be both intentional, things that are happening as a result of various treatment and side effects, certainly personal beliefs about adherence and the importance of that, medication self-efficacy, the ability of individuals to feel that they can confidently manage their care and their oral medications. And then we get into unintentional sequelae that include access and cost, and certainly social determinants of health. We've had an increased focus in our healthcare community over the past years on the important role that social determinants play in health outcomes, and how important it is to address those things related to race, ethnicity, demographic location, et cetera, that influence both the outcomes of the treatment that we provide, as well as overall well-being for individuals with particular diagnoses. And then, of course, something that we all can relate to, forgetting, simply forgetting. We'll explore these more in the next slide. In the context of a digital health coaching program, one of the things that's very important to us is assessing at the outset what barriers exist for the individuals that we serve. And in order to do that, we have a self-developed tool that assesses data related to barriers and the significance of those barriers. So we ask patients what barriers exist and to what degree are they present in your ability to access and take your medication? And we have patients rate those from minor to major. That data then allows us to assess how we can connect individuals with tools and resources that are needed to overcome these barriers and to improve their adherence. The case medication adherence index is then used for a subjective report. So when we heard in our previous presentation about the really current technologies that are available to give us objective data about medication taking, we can complement that certainly with patient-reported outcomes like the case index for assessing a patient self-report of taking medication, barriers, and missed doses. And in the next slide, you're going to see data that we're presenting on a retrospective analysis of adherence information across a population of individuals with cancer diagnosis engaged in our program. Here we have a sample of 851 individuals that we're reporting on, of which 325 had reported missing at least one dose of medication. So 38% of the population engaged in this particular digital health program reported missing at least one dose of medication. And of those, the most common self-reported barriers to adherence were side effects, which is not an uncommon concern in the oncology population, forgetting, and then certainly cost. We then analyzed in relation to individuals who reported such barriers what the average number of missed doses is per week, and understanding that many oncologic therapies are infused, and so really focusing here more on oral therapies, which could be both the cancer treatment itself, or as Allison is going to speak to, the number of medications that we use for other symptom management and control. We found that among those experiencing side effects, the actual number of missed doses per week was less than one across the board, but a very low number of actual missed doses for this specific population, remembering that this is not reflective of larger overall trends in the data, but this cohort particularly. Also, cost resulted in a lower number of average missed doses per week, with the highest number of average missed doses being reported by patients who forgot to take their medication. What this tells us is that even if it's just a small number of missed doses, that can still have an impact on the therapeutic effect of the medication that we're taking. So opportunities to address these concerns. Next slide, please. So here we've done an analysis and we've used a cohort of individuals with type 2 diabetes as well as a comparator so that you can see how oncology participants in this digital health program compared with those with type 2 diabetes. And we compared populations prior to COVID and those engaged post-COVID to really reflect on the differences between these two populations. So in the type 2 diabetes population, the most commonly reported barrier was cost prior to COVID-19, as well as post-COVID-19. However, that was not the variable associated with the most frequent missed doses. That was forgetting in both circumstances. The oncology population prior to COVID-19 reported side effects as the greatest barrier and similarly did the same post-COVID-19. But those associated with the greatest number of missed doses was forgetting, as well as then access to medication, which makes sense in the context of COVID, as well as knowledge. Next slide. So when we're evaluating the overall landscape of oral adherence, barriers, challenges, and particularly in the COVID-19 context, what we can observe from the previous slides, again, data reported from a real-world project, is that knowledge can be impacted by the absence of a caregiver at the time of education. So you saw that for the oncology population, the most frequently observed missed doses was associated with knowledge and understanding of the importance of the drug. Many centers have limited the number of people who can participate in an in-person visit. So that may have been impacting people's understanding of when and how to take medication. Side effects continue to be the most significant determinant of adherence. So proper and effective planning for symptom management is very important in the context of oncology care. No new news there. And home-based monitoring and support may be even more pivotal in the absence of traditional visits, even if a person is engaging in digital health visits, digital wellness wellness visits with their physician and healthcare team. COVID-19 has certainly demonstrated the need for enhanced digital health options, such as those that you saw presented by Susan. And it's also precipitated an uptick in oral oncolytic prescribing. So this idea of how do we decompress the volume in the physical care space by providing oral therapies where appropriate. It also emphasizes the need for collaborative solutions to address medication dispensing and monitoring, and for financial support to ensure persistent taking of medication. Next slide. So when we think about what types of digital solutions are available in addition to the oral pill that you heard more about in the previous presentation, there are a number of documented interventions in the literature that have been tested to evaluate their efficacy in addressing oral adherence. The focus of these interventions is often on enhancing the patient's self-efficacy in taking medication, improving knowledge of the medication efficacy, and providing early support for anticipating and managing side effects. Some of these interventions include smartphone applications, web-based applications, as well as structured education delivered either by healthcare providers themselves or by supportive programs and organizations to enhance outcomes. Qualitative studies that have talked to patients about their experience suggest that the uptake of digital interventions could be influenced by cost, language availability, or competency. So as we're exploring the availability of digital solutions, really focusing on, is it affordable? Is it accessible by individuals, particularly in English-speaking populations? And is there competency, digital competency in how to interact with the intervention? Patient-reported outcomes are pivotal across the oncology space. Certainly, we've heard a lot about the effectiveness and the impact of monitoring PROs due to the pivotal work by Ethan Bash and other colleagues, and really emphasizing the reporting of high symptom burden and how digital solutions can help to both assess and address that. And then, of course, considering social determinant of health barriers such that the technology that's developed is made accessible to all people who can benefit. Next slide. Finally here, just a quick report out so that you can see some ways in which digital technologies may be leveraged. You heard the data reporting from Susan's team about how the digital pill has resulted in measurable outcomes. In the same, we're always assessing how digital solutions can be used to increase adherence, and therefore an independent party analysis of participants in this digital health program found that patients increased their prescription fill rate when engaged in the digital health coaching program. You can see an average of 4.86 out of 6 prescriptions over a 6-month program. And for oncology participants specifically, a 12% increase in medication adherence for this population. So together, these types of creative solutions that focus on multifactorial influences on oral adherence can help to support improved outcomes. But it's not me that you want this information from, and that's why I'm so pleased to have Alice and Rosen with us today to provide a real-world lived experience with some of the challenges and opportunities around oral adherence. Allison?
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm learning something along with everyone listening as well. So just a little bit of background about who I am. I am a 9-year colorectal cancer survivor. I've had 4 open surgeries, chemotherapy and radiation, and my chemotherapy actually was oral. So I think this is a perfect topic for me to sort of talk on. I have a permanent ostomy. I've survived sepsis about 4 times. I have kidney disease. Cognitive ability has been affected by my cancer treatment, and just medical history of Crohn's and asthma. So I take many pills, many medications, and I have done so for many, many years. I think myself as an advocate, I had put a quote on the bottom of this saying that cancer does not define me, but it's made me the person I am today, stronger, happier, and healthier. And I love talking to groups like this so that I can give the patient voice and the patient perspective to help improve whatever technology or whatever you are doing to help increase adherence and just overall care for a patient, no matter what they're struggling with. So this is a picture of me on the last day of taking my oral chemo. I posted a picture. I'm very good on social media, so it's interesting here about all this digital applications and things that are technologies that are being developed. But I was very proud of this and, posted it on social media, and you all get to see it. Next slide, please. So I took a picture last night of all the pill bottles I have in one drawer. And this is now, being a 9-year colorectal cancer survivor. I want to say during my treatment, this was probably double the amount of pill bottles I was having to take. And so my oral chemo was a load up, and I had to take medication throughout my cancer treatment for nausea, vomiting, constipation, pain, anxiety, fertility, hormones, and sort of all the different other long-term side effects. Some that I mentioned related to my kidneys, some that are related to osteoporosis, so many different things related to my treatment. So obviously adherence is huge, and I'm adept in technology, and I didn't know about some of these technologies. So it's really interesting to hear what people are talking about as far as helping someone like myself be able to remember to take all these, because not only did my treatment, was I going through my treatment, but as I was going through my treatment, my memory, which you all have mentioned, suffered. Not because, sometimes because of the medicine, but also because I was exhausted most days during treatment. And I'm even exhausted now just because of some of the long-term effects that I have. So besides that, this sort of gives you an understanding of, like I said, I'm 9 years out. I'm still taking the majority of these medicines for different things. I'm a patient that's actually taking, I'm a cancer patient, but think about someone that is a diabetic patient. Usually you have an underlying condition, then you usually have a ton of medicine that you have to take for side effects. And so I sort of wanted to show you on a daily basis the amount of pills I have to take. Next slide, please. So different things that help me and different things that I did not know about and things I'm learning about today. So the picture sort of shows, I've been in the hospital a zillion times. I can't even count on my hands. I don't have enough toes and hands to tell you how many times I've been in the hospital. And, you're in the hospital for an infection or for whatever you might be in there for. Every single, one of these IVs has to turn into a pill form. And usually there's different types of pill forms if it doesn't work. And there's side effects that you have to deal with all those. And you saw all those pill bottles. So what helped me and different things that I did, during my treatment, I was staying with my parents who are my caregivers, and we wrote handwritten calendars. Hearing about all this digital technology that's available and these apps that were available, I wasn't well enough necessarily. I'm good with apps. I'm good with my phone. I'm good with technology. My parents, not necessarily the same. So for my dad, it was old school. It was writing this calendar. And for me, it was, when I was well enough, setting alarms and alerts on my smartphone. So, I mean, the majority of the time, I'm not going to lie, I was asleep. I wasn't well, depending on what was going on at the current time during my treatment. And like I said, even now, I have to set alarms and reminders to take certain medicines. And my doctors definitely scared me with some of the medicines, especially the oral chemo. They're like, you shouldn't miss it because of this. So I think communication from the provider helped me with my adherence to my medicine more so than anything else. That was probably number one. If I missed something, I don't exactly remember the words that he said, but it made me want to, maybe whatever I can do to remember to take this medicine, I'm going to do, because even if I miss one dose, it could affect my treatment. And, you don't know as you're going through cancer, if your disease, at least for me, I didn't know if my disease was progressing because I had chemo and radiation at the same time. And then I had surgery. There was no scans during that time. There were scans at the beginning and scans later. So we wrote handwritten sort of calendars and the alerts on the alarms. And then, if I didn't wake up, because there were times that I fell asleep very, very, soundly, my parents would essentially remind me. So I think taking into account not only the patient, but the caregiver who's going to be most likely helping them, if they even have that. And then thinking about patients that might not have a caregiver. It was mentioned earlier about, I didn't know, and my physicians and doctors didn't necessarily tell me about the technology. So who at the hospital is the person that is responsible for telling the patient about the applications that might be available, the websites they might be able to go to, the support programs like Kelly mentioned, Pack Health, that are available? if I had known about a lot of these during my treatment, I would have taken advantage of them to the best of my ability. I was treated in 2012. Some of this technology might not have come out, but or might not have been out, but it definitely would have helped me. And if there's some sort of training for like maybe these older caregivers or patients, I'm young, but I think I'm not necessarily typical for a, there's not a typical patient necessarily, but if you think about older people, again, like my parents, they probably would not have the room on their old phone to download an application. My dad has to delete photos because he has too many on there. So you have to sort of figure out that maybe the phone might not be the best option, a computer, or maybe they don't have a phone or a computer. So I think Kelly mentioned social determinants of health, and for my day job, I work in public health with these specific populations. So you have to figure out what will work best for everybody, starting with these people that don't have certain access, and then people like myself that might have access, might have knowledge, but making sure it's a comprehensive approach so that everyone involved understands. And COVID-19 has made it very difficult. And I didn't even do a slide about this, but I haven't really, I have left my house now, but for the first year of COVID, I did not leave my house because I was immunocompromised, because I had all these conditions. So I only had doctor's appointments virtually. I only had, limited, time with various people, but essentially I mainly saw my parents and people via, the computer. And I was lucky because I had that sort of connection, but it's opened the eyes to technology like Zoom and other things that might be available. So I think there's a great opportunity there to make sure that what we've learned during COVID can be used and carried on even after COVID, which hopefully will be over soon. So we can all get back to traveling and whatnot. So in conclusion, I'm not your typical patient, but I represent, not only my voice, but essentially my parents. My mom's a breast cancer survivor. I've helped take care of her. My dad's a diabetic. I've helped take care of him. And I've had friends, older and younger, not only with cancer, with other disease-specific, with other diseases, figure out and helped navigate what is their disease. And it's not always easy, and it's not the same for everybody. It's different for even the same cancers. I took a totally different chemotherapy than a few of my best friends. So I think sort of taking into account all of that, and developing something that, oopsie.
We got you, Allison, no worries.
Oh, I moved something on my computer. But even so, I just want to end and say that I appreciate everybody engaging with the patient and the patient voice and asking them what they need, because that is, you're going to get honest answers, no matter if you want to hear it or not, from people like myself and other people that I'm sure you've engaged with.
Thank you, Allison, for that presentation. Very much enjoyed your insight, and I have a ton of questions to ask you. Hopefully I won't take all of our Q&A time to ask you questions specifically, but thank you for that fantastic insight that's important for every single one of us on the line to keep in mind whenever we're building these kinds of technologies. So thank you for that, Allison. Now, in your presentation, you also mentioned a lot of the support you got from your providers, which is a great transition to our next presentation here from Dr. Ed Greenow. Ed, can you kick us off? Oh, you're on mute.
You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I'm a medical oncologist. I do primarily GI oncology, and most of my work these days is running our cancer program for our health system. And a big part of that is helping make sure we safely and effectively manage chemotherapy for our patients. And I think I want to talk today about the context of how digital technology is helping us do that better as things change. So when we started this, we used to only give chemotherapy in the hospital. So it's a long time ago. I've been doing this for a long time, and I remember those days. And only a few people were allowed to give it. And it was because the drugs have such a narrow therapeutic window. And there was a big opportunity and a big consequence for errors. You can do the next slide. And this became particularly apparent as we began, back up one there. When we moved forward You're getting ahead of us there, Rachel, if you go back. There we go. So this became particularly apparent as we started to move the administration into the clinic. And we found through some thought, a lot through making mistakes early on, that giving chemotherapy required a lot of careful management. We created very structured order processes, and only certain physicians were allowed to order this. A lot of the processes involved around just showing your thinking, showing your math, so everybody knew you were doing the right thing. We built in a lot of secondary measures, a lot of structured review by the pharmacy staff. So they would double check your regimen, they'd double check your math, they had multiple double checks in the preparation to be sure what went into the IV bag was right. And then the chemo was given by a certified infusion nurse, somebody who was specially trained to do this, had a lot of insights, and whose job was not just to understand how to hook up the IV and let the chemo run into the patient, but actually to review my thinking as the oncologist to make sure I hadn't made some error and that what she was doing was aligned with what I had thought. And also assessing the patient to understand, is it okay to treat this patient today? Because the cancer patient's condition can change frequently. Next slide. And so now what we started to see with the advent of oral medications, but actually with some of our IV medications too, that we're shifting treatment to home. So we're sort of following that arc of, healthcare started at home and we moved it to the hospital and then to the clinic, and now we're moving it back to home. This created a whole host of problems because many of the safety and quality measures we had built into chemotherapy administration were tied to the fact that it was being given in an IV infusion center that was highly controlled. When we first started giving oral chemotherapy, anyone could write a prescription and just write it out on a prescription pad like anything else. So this was in the days before it was all electronic. And any pharmacy would fill the prescription. And there really was no oversight by that pharmacy of, is this the right drug, the right dose, whatever. There's some restrictions on that came about mostly from the perspective of the payers who didn't want to pay for drugs if they didn't have to, but not so much around safety. And so we spent a lot of time working on ways to do this and actually just recreated much of what happened with the infusion chemotherapy, creating structured order sets, making people show their math, making sure it would only get filled at certain pharmacies, and that the pharmacist was double checking our math and all of those other things we had. But the piece that was hardest to deal with was the fact that now instead of an infusion nurse looking at the patient and deciding if this was the right drug and the patient was well enough, the patient had to look in the mirror. They were just like the infusion nurse. The patient had to look in the mirror and said, am I taking the right pills? Is this the right time? Am I doing well enough to take the dose, or some of the side effects I have maybe mean I shouldn't take today's dose? And am I having toxicities that need to be managed? So some of those things we could create mechanisms to help with by having the pharmacist meet with the patient up front before they started, lots of phone calls back and forth, reaching out to the patient, things that help but didn't quite answer the question. And we really needed to come up with something better. And I have, I think on the next slide, a couple of examples through our early experience giving oral chemotherapy of why we really need to have a better mechanism to do this. One of very early, this was shortly after Xeloda had been approved and we were just beginning to use it. And I had a nurse with metastatic colon cancer. She was having a great response to her Xeloda, was having no side effects, just what you'd like to see. But she didn't believe chemo could be helping her if it wasn't making her sick. And so she did something I never would have expected, which was she photocopied her prescription and went to a second pharmacy and filled her prescription twice and doubled her chemotherapy dose. And she got a nice long vacation in the hospital for several weeks after that. I had another patient, high-grade neuroendocrine carcinoma, something very aggressive. We really needed to be on target with her treatment. Had a relapse of her bad psychiatric disease and ended up in a psychiatric hospital. She was getting her drugs through an out-of-state specialty pharmacy that her insurance required. We had no idea what pills she had taken or not taken, where she was in her cycle, and really couldn't manage anything. Another patient, this is the one that has always stuck with me the most, was a young man with metastatic cancer I treated for years. And we'd gotten to the end of all the multiple treatments we have for colon cancer. And he kept pestering me about going back to the Xeloda. And I kept explaining, no, it doesn't work to go back to something that's failed. And he eventually admitted, well, actually, when he progressed on Xeloda, it was because he wasn't taking his Xeloda. And he'd gone had a good response, wasn't getting sick, but for various reasons had decided to stop taking it without ever telling us. And so I thought he progressed on Xeloda and didn't know he hadn't taken it. He had thousands of dollars worth of chemo sitting at home in his medicine cabinet that he'd never taken. So that led us to try and do something more. And if we go to the next slide, we began a project with digitizing the oral chemo pills. We did this with a company called Proteus, which is now defunct, but a technology similar to what you've heard from ETech in terms of having sensors with the chemo pills that would allow us to see what they were taking. And we set this up so the patient and pharmacist would sit together and set up their plan within an app. This was important because it made the patient an active participant rather than a passive recipient of this. Patient puts a sensor. This was something that was physically affixed to their body. When they took their pills, it registered and told us exactly what they took. They had an app that, in addition to being the interface, the patient could also enter symptoms they were having so we could get feedback on that. And all that then came back through a web portal to the clinic that the patient could see, the pharmacist could see, the provider could see, both in real time and in a cumulative effect. So you could actually see what the patient was taking. It would collate all the events that were happening. So as the clinician, when I would see the patient after 2 or 3 months of treatment, I actually had a graphic representation of when they had side effects, what doses they'd actually taken. This dramatically reduced the need on the part of the pharmacist to reach out and talk to the patient, which was our technology for doing that before, and made a huge difference in how things went for the patient. Allowed us to take much better care of them. If you go to the next slide, just some examples, some anecdotes of things that helped. So the classic mistake of patients, no matter how many times you tell them, not understanding what you're giving. So a patient who told them your dose is 2 pills twice a day, which the patient interprets as 1 pill in the morning and 1 pill at night. With the use of this technology, the pharmacist within 24 hours realized the patient's taking the wrong dose, reach out to the patient and talk to them about it and correct that. I had one of my favorite patients that I still take care of, who was a single mom with school-age kids, and she kept finding herself, before we started this, at the end of the day, she's exhausted, finally has the kids in bed, and she can't remember if she's taking her pills or not. And she's spreading them out on the kitchen table, counting how many pills are left in her bottle to try and understand, did I take my dose or not? Once we started using this, she was able to just look at her app and it told her that she had not taken them. And in fact, if she got too long past when it was due, it reminded her. Had another patient who'd had a history of poor compliance with her chemo. And once we were doing this, the first time she missed one of her doses in the evening, part of the application was it would ask the patient for a reason why it would remind them first to take their dose. And if they didn't, they had to put in a reason in the app of why they didn't. Turned out for her, she had bad arthritis, and her daughter wasn't always there in the evening time. And if her daughter wasn't there to open her pill bottle for her at night, she just didn't take her dose. Something that she'd never told us before. It was an easy problem to fix, obviously, but we just didn't have a window into that. So lots of clear benefits. And then if you go to the next slide, the piece that we were just about to embark on before our partner went bankrupt was really to make this a much richer environment in terms of the information we get back by adding the signaling chip to all the supportive care meds, so that I'd be able to see when the patient takes extra antiemetics, when they're taking extra antidiarrheals, how much of their pain meds they're taking, to start to have objective measures to go along with all those subjective things we were asking the patient to enter. So this project to us was a big boon. It really is a powerful testament to the technology helping us. And unfortunately, this company failed because they couldn't figure out a business model. Because like a lot of healthcare, there's problems with how we get paid for things. And they were having trouble figuring out how to have a viable way to get paid for the technology.
Okay, let me then jump to our next presentation there. Thank you so much, Ed. So now we'll jump over to Mark, who is giving us a verbal presentation, giving us a bit of a break from the slides to provide us the pharmaceutical aspect from this kind of technology. Mark?
Great, thanks very much, Rachel. So I have the great pleasure of leading the digital health team inside of Janssen Pharmaceuticals, and our focus is really around finding those novel patient-facing technologies that drive insights into disease. And clearly, medication adherence, that's a big part of it as well. And so now, certainly, just keeping an eye on the clock, I'll keep this relatively brief, but there's really two lenses which that we look at this, and I'll share with you today. So first, obviously from a technology perspective. So as a technologist, data is king. The more data, the better, usually. And so understanding adherence, I mean, clearly there's benefit from a pharmaceutical development perspective. We want to understand, how is this therapy impacting our patients? How is it hopefully helping their quality of life, and what challenges are they facing along the way? So the more data that we're able to collect, clearly that's going to inform the development side of things. But we also know that there are additional data points that could be captured, and certainly understanding side effects, all of that. Of course, we have our typical adverse event reporting system when things come up, but that helps us. And also not getting data, that helps us to some extent as well. I think that that Allison, and she talked about the challenges that she faced in taking medicine. And if we don't get data, then the chances are there's a problem. Maybe there's a problem with the technology, or there's an issue with the patient, one way or the other. And that kind of helps. But again, being able to provide some amount of reasoning for it, that's extraordinarily important as well. That being said, we spend a great deal of time looking at patient burden, or just what we generally call technology friction. So if we can build extraordinarily detail-oriented systems, but just like medications, we feel that burden and adherence can sometimes be inversely proportional. So if we're asking patients to jump through a lot of hoops from a technology perspective, and they're already dealing with a disease or trying to manage their health, at some point, one or both things is eventually going to give. So that's top of mind for us. Now, certainly the technology, we wanted to be seamless. We've talked before about the invisible technology, and in my view, things you set up technology once, and it should just effectively sit in the background and collect data. And so certainly you could do a very basic system where, look, putting reminders on your smartphone is technically an adherence system. Now, granted, you're not sharing a lot of data there, but a bare minimum, hopefully patients are continuing to take their medication. But there isn't a lot of integration there. So things that we can do to, say, preload all of the patient's medication information so that they don't have to put that information in themselves, extraordinarily important, because obviously there's room for error just from a human interaction standpoint. So those are also things that we look at there. The other part then is around accessibility. We spend a great deal of time making sure that the technology we use is accessible to everyone. We work in a global environment, and so being able to deploy technology in other countries, and the challenges that come with that from a privacy perspective, from a data security perspective, there are lots of things that we have to think about there too. So again, there's very basic systems that work well in some settings, and in other areas, depending upon available infrastructure. And as Allison pointed out, just being tech savvy, like there's different levels. Those are all things that we consider when we look at these kinds of solutions. So then we talk about what does it really mean from just a patient perspective, and then ultimately what does it really mean to pharma. So look, I talked about the technology being invisible. So realistically, we don't want the patient to have to change from a daily routine. Habits, are good habits, are almost always helpful when it comes to these kinds of things. And so if we're asking patients to do something special with a piece of technology, so if I have to go get a separate piece of technology just to take my pills, well, that's creating friction. And that's not something we particularly want. We also expect that technology, or really the data, should follow the patient wherever they go. So look, clearly things are challenging from a travel perspective today, but If you're on vacation, you shouldn't have to do extra things with your technology there just because you happen to travel. So, or if you're going internationally, what does that do from a data privacy perspective, or again, from a data security perspective? Again, those are all things that we think about. And so I mentioned how important data is to us. And so if you look at it just from a broader clinical trial pharmaceutical development perspective, its consistency is absolutely important. Like we need that data back from patients to understand the impact of therapy, to understand if there are side effects. And if we have spotty adherence, then ultimately it could be patients down the road that pay the price for that. If we don't get enough information, if we don't have enough insights, that's certainly challenging. It's also important for us to know that the patients are taking their medication. We want to be engaged with them, because look, if it's unbeknown to us that the patient's not taking the medication, there's a high probability that they're probably going to drop out of the clinical trial. Now, some patients may be relying on those medications as a last effort to manage their disease, and that's certainly a concern too. But we want to make sure that the patients are continuing along in the trial process, and med adherence can help with some visibility to that extent. And the last thing is really just looking at it from a cost perspective. Running clinical trials is expensive, and when we have patients that either don't provide, they're not adhering to their treatments, they're not providing data, all of that, then again we get that inconclusive view. Having patients drop out, then it causes trials to run longer. Enrollment, recruitment is expensive. It takes more time. And again, ultimately, it's the downstream patients that ultimately pay the price, because it's that much longer before therapies can come to market. So the takeaway here is we are always interested in medication adherence systems. It's an important facet. It's something that my team spends a great deal of time looking at, because ultimately we want more for our patients. We want that better data, and we certainly want to be able to get therapies to market that will help the patients. So I'll pause here, and Rachel, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for your fantastic presentations today. I certainly learned a lot, and I was busy taking notes through a lot of the presentations, kind of pulling on my old student skills here to both listen actively and take notes by hand. So thank you, everyone. I do have a question I'd like to kick off and sort of open this to the group too. So we talk a lot about, patient adherence, and a lot of times that language is really condescending and accusatory towards our patients, which is really unfortunate. I personally believe that if patients are having a hard time being adherent, that's a problem of the treatment plan. We saw lots of research today, also from Kelly's research, and also from Allison's mouth, about how difficult it is just to exist in this world, and then a condition, and then a really complex condition. So that really affects people's ability to really follow a treatment plan. I personally believe that, as product developers, it's our responsibility to build products that are worthy of patients' time and their energy. Not only patients, but also providers too, also getting at some of the lessons learned from Dr. Greeno as well. So my questions will be primarily towards the developers on the team. I think I'm going to start with Eric. So my question is, as we've been building these products, we've had a really infamous case study to learn from a competitor, which Ed touched on a little bit too, where a lot of the failures were based upon really not engaging in patients and building this technology. A lot of times we build things and think it's great, but whenever we ask patients to use them, we've kind of been blindsided about how it functions in the world. So my question is, how have you used patient engagement and patient insights in product development? And what have you learned from patients directly, and that you've been able to roll into the creation of your products to make really great products that we can have them use on the market?
Gee, how much time do we have?
You got like 12 seconds.
Yeah, say this is not a simple question. It's a fantastic question, and we learn every day. I mean, every time we think we've learned something, and I think the rest of these panelists would nod their head vigorously, because all of us are patients at some point, and we take our ideas and we try and reflect those into our products. And all of us are trying to help solve these problems in the way you described. I think one of the most fascinating things, and Kelly, I loved your presentation because some of the data there, some of it reinforced things that I kind of thought, but hadn't known, and some of them blew me away. And the biggest thing is every person we go out there, the example I'd love to pick is how transparent should the technology be? On one hand, I completely agree with Mark in that the technology needs to fade in the background. I need to be able to just go about my business and take my medicine and do my things. But on the other hand, if I've got bad habits, I need something that's going to help me out of that bad habit. And oftentimes the act of having to do something is going to help you change your behavior. So there's a second degree of learning there, in that not only do we need to help people to be adherent, we need to help them to learn new habits. So this is a combination of technology and coaching and everything else rolled in between. So I'm sure we haven't learned nearly enough, Rachel. Activities like this help us a lot. Allison, I can't thank you enough for the input. The picture of your pill drawer, I'm going to, if you don't mind, share with some of my engineers just to point out some of the challenges they haven't quite anticipated. So I appreciate that. And I felt like I rambled a little bit there, Rachel, but I don't know that I could put a simple answer in your comprehensive question there, but we do our best to learn from both our patients and our researchers every day.
Of course. Thank you for that, Eric. And while we have Allison on the line, we're privileged to have an expert patient with us. I'd like to ask you, Allison, the questions that I have is, what are questions that as a patient you wish product developers would ask? What are the important things that you think that we should all know as we're building these products to help patients, whether it's digital pill technology or really anything else to help patients?
I think just before I even answer that question, having a patient for whatever technology you're developing for whatever drug or disease, I think having a patient as a part of that process from the very beginning till the very end, and then continuing on, is really, really important. And I've been lucky enough to be involved in patient-reported outcomes and different things. And I can't tell you how many times that I'm just telling my opinion and they listen. I think that it's all about exactly all the things that were mentioned today: ease of technology, cost, accessibility. I think, the number one thing for me was, if my provider is telling me I need to take this medicine, I'm going to do it. And then if I can't do it, or there's something that I struggle with doing, a way to communicate back to either the person that's providing that technology that's helping me, or directly to the provider. Because oftentimes something does go wrong with, I don't know, maybe taking one of my medicines or getting my prescription filled or whatnot. And sometimes you can't get a hold of anybody. So I really think that, the most important things to a patient, or let's make this as easy as possible and not exactly what Mark said, not interrupt my daily life. Because the last thing we want to do is to spend more time having to figure out a technology or having to figure something else out. So I think as much engagement as you can get from the beginning to end to whatever technology you're doing, and having everyone involved in the process, from the provider to the patient to the caregiver involved, is really important.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Allison. Now I've got 15,000 extra questions, but we're running out of time here. So I want to thank all of our presenters for a really fantastic event today. And these slides and the recording will be made available afterwards. We'd like to round out too with the following final events that are coming from DIME that are upcoming. One is a session from our playbook talking about how academic research is critical to building trust. We have a whole selection here of folks who are very instrumental in helping create our playbook. And then additionally, our next webinar will be next month. It's called Death by Pilot, how solid evidence can help digital health vendors achieve scale here. I think that could be useful for everyone on the line, as well as before. So again, I'd like to thank everyone for their excellent presentation, everyone for their time and attention today as we all build products that are worthy of patients' time. And also big thank you to Allison for giving us your invaluable insight and for being with us today, and also banging the drum again to all teams to have patients involved with developing all projects. So thank you everyone for your time today, for presenting, and also for joining us live. Thanks, everyone.